Here we go. Welcome to In-Depth Conversations with Tia Adeyemo. Keren Tang is a public health advocate, a community organizer, city builder, and she's our neighbor. She became the councillor for Ward Carrier in 2021, running on three pillars: community, economy, and the climate. She joins Steve to chat about council matters. Happy New Year, Karen. Thank you so much for
Happy
making
New
the
Year.
time for us.
Thank you for having me.
I want you to take us back to the night you won in October. How did you feel when you realized you had this thing in the bag?
How did I feel when I had this in the bag? I mean, it was very I think it was interesting because that day, we were kind of election day usually for a campaign is usually this is actually probably the slowest day of the campaign. But it's slow for the candidate in terms of, this is a day you really take to energize yourself, take care of yourself. But volunteers were working round the clock on the phones and just reminding people to get out of the vote. And all week long, we've been doing so much door knocking and canvassing and receiving so much positive responses from voters and from residents that I was feeling really positive, throughout the day. I was feeling really positive, and then showing up at the office and just seeing everybody exhausted from all the phone calls, feeling really grateful. By the evening, rolled around, we had, like a very core team together watching the news streamed, and at that time, and they announced it, it was just like, "Whoa," that's me on the screen there. I couldn't believe it. But at the same time, I could believe it, and I felt right, and it was the right thing that was happening. Um, and I think I was more just, it felt so surreal. I didn't even know what to say. And, we were kind of crying, we're hugging. But I think more than anything, I was just more speechless and felt really grateful to be with my team and family at the time.
Oh, saying how hard you worked and how so well deserving that was for you. How life changing has this experience been as counselor?
Yeah, I feel like I am I mean, I think our life is completely different, and I don't think it has fully sunk in yet. But I'm sure, in the next 4 years, it will definitely sink in at some point. I think the daily rhythm is very different than I'm used to. There are things that's top of mind now for me in terms of being a public figure that I never had to think about before. Um, and, I actually used at one point, I used to work for the city as an employee, and as an employee, you focus on certain content area, of the work that you're doing. But as a counselor, you are a generalist. You have to kind of have your kind of pulse on everything, from, zoning this law over here to issues around transit and policing and all of that. And, and I think that is a kind of pace that I wasn't no, I knew it was coming, but I'm still adjusting for sure.
Were there things you were able to do before that you are not able to do again because you've transitioned to counselor?
Yeah, we have to adjust some of our family schedule, my husband and I always we have a kind of a rotating schedule during the week and weekends, in terms of the various extracurricular that we take our daughter to. And so, I can't make all of those now. It's just not possible given that sometimes we're in council meetings until 9:30, 10:30 p.m. at night. Um, I have to rethink about, like, family time and dinner time for sure, and how we spend our weekends. Because at least, up until now, I'm finding any free moment I have, that's not sitting in council chamber or talking to community groups, I'm reading. There are a ton and ton of reading. So I'm reading, until midnight every day, and then reading on weekends, and that's also family time that I need to think about how to balance.
Is it true you have? I heard that counselors actually have people who do their reading for them, and they just summarize the points in padded wallets, and then they give you the summary. Is that true? Oh, I didn't hear it right.
Well, I think it depends on what works for different counselors. As a counselor, you get uh, a lot of reports. And if you think about an individual's ability, some people read fast, some people just take their time to really dig into the details. I think in the past, some people have done that, but the advice I've gotten from the veteran counselors currently is that in your first year, read everything cover to cover, and because you want to know how things work.
Mm.
And but you also have support staff who are really on site to for that support for the policy analysis component, and sometimes the summarizing component. But I think the rule of thumb for me at least is, as someone who's very detail oriented, I like to get into the weeds. I like to kind of know what's going on, and right now I am reading everything.
Do you know, it feels so nice, and I feel deeply privileged to see your progress. I remember in 2019 when we started to do podcast. No, we're doing with Mary Thomas panels. I remember I called you then. I was looking up your profiles, and we've been in and out, off and on with our relationship. And seeing you here now is just so beautiful. And one thing I know for sure since 2019 has been consistent about you is that you are passionate about giving women a voice. Why do you care so much about giving organizations like ourselves visibility, people like myself a voice? Why?
Uh, I think growing up, and I immigrated to North America when I was a young child. I think language was part of it, and I think part of it was my upbringing, my cultural background. But when I started to attend a North American school, I was too scared to speak up, and I will always be that really quiet Asian child in the back of the room. Um, and looking back, I almost feel like, when I grew up in a very small middle class white town, and that was, and I was probably one of two East Asian students in my grade. And that was how it came off, as just shy, doesn't know English, doesn't have a voice. You end up perpetuating, I think, that stereotype for Asian people. And at some point in high school, I did find my voice, and I did find I think my power and my truth, and started speaking up more. But then when you kind of start to head into like the workplace, a lot of I think the things I experienced early on as a child start to come forward. I'm not always the loudest person in the room, but it's often the loudest people in the room who are seen as leaders. Um, and I remember once during a conference when I spoke about women in politics, at the end of it, this young Asian woman came up to me and she asked me, how do you overcome the stereotype of Asian women as so docile that they are not seen as leaders? They're always subjected to the back of the room. How do you overcome that? And I think it's those stories and those experiences um, that made me realize, at least for myself, I am a leader. I may be a different kind of leader than what we're used to as a society. I think there's such a thing. And what I'm excited about being elected is that, there's a message that quiet leadership, I think this different kind of leadership is welcome, at the table, that we don't always need to have the same type of people, leading our city or leading that kind of that decision making. And I think that's why I'm passionate about people who um, don't always aren't always seen as having voice or having that leadership skills, but in fact they are in their own right. And I think those people tend to be women. They tend to be racialized. They tend to be young sometimes. Although I find more and more our young people are, have a lot of power to their voices now too. So
I like to thank you for that. I'd like to ask if being a counselor, you've worked for it, you've earned it. Do you feel the stereotype is changing because of what you've achieved? Are people thinking twice about women like yourself?
I think, and I think for a long time I've held this belief that, if I just show myself, if I show that, I know my stuff, I know what I'm talking about at the door, that can change minds, and that can win me some votes. I would say, this last couple years, especially during COVID, and then certainly during the height of anti-Asian hate, and I think in particular it was during the Atlanta shooting, and I think I actually came on the show with you and a few others to talk about the glass ceiling. And it was just, I think, after the Atlanta shooting, and I was really emotional. And I don't know why this time it felt very different. And I think all of a sudden I had this realization about um, how I come off to people. Because I think during that period, there's a lot of discussions in the media, in the mainstream media, on social media about why Asian hate is so different than different forms of hate, and why specifically targeting Asian women, um, that kind of discrimination is so different. And so much of that is unsaid. It's very invisible, and it's not about how voters see me. It's how the subconscious, the unconscious bias they may have towards people like me, that if I am Asian and an Asian woman, therefore I'm quiet, I'm submissive, and I'm not going to be standing up and um,
Mm.
and fighting for you, and therefore you're not leadership enough to be in this role. And so again, I feel incredibly privileged and honored to have won the support of the ward, to be in this position right now, because I think that message is um, hopefully signals to me that I think there is a shift, that there may always be those unconscious bias towards people like me, and towards people like you, towards different kinds of people, but overwhelmingly I feel supported this time. And that my initial instinct about, there are ways to demonstrate who our leaders are, that we could, our society need different kinds of leaders. I think that still stand.
Mm. Well, there's a lot of hope in that actually, and I remember the show. I do, and even more poignant is this very moment and how you're making being a counselor open to everybody, is for everyone. So, is this what you feel? Is the city of Edmonton for everyone? With the little you've been there a couple of months now, would you say the structures, the unconscious way people work, is it open for real for everybody?
I think, city of Edmonton as the local government is an institution, and I think institutions always need people to push it to change. And if I think back to decades of the history it's been there, I think right now it looks very different in terms of the makeup of the leadership of the workforce, and some of the policies that is going in there now. And I think in many ways, we need that. It is because of community push and community drive that we have, the anti-racism advisory committee, for example, that we have the women's advocacy voice, that we have the accessibility advisory committee. Um, and without those perspectives, and I think the reason why we have those perspectives, because for a long time we haven't had those lived experiences within our leadership, within our workforce, to advise on decisions and policy making. um, and so I think there's always room for change, but change, I think one time you asked me, like, what is my favorite quote, and my favorite quote is, um, change doesn't happen without people's voice. And so I think there's room for that, and there's many different ways of expressing that voice. And I think my role as a counselor is to figure out, how do we make sure everyone knows what those ways are? How do we make sure everyone knows how to reach their counselors, how to reach city staff? How do you share a concern, an idea, um, and how do you share your stories?
Mm. And that is so true. But what I hear from what you're saying is, because you are in your own space now, living your own truth, some people might feel uncomfortable we've seen you in your space, doing your work, being you. Is there a plan to deal with such bias or such constructions as and when they occur? Or do we just take it as a blanket acceptance that I'm elected councillor now? It's all going to be, you know, all good from here on out.
Are you talking specifically about like, threats and that kind of stuff?
Yes, I'm asking about the the white male theory, where if you are not white and you're not male, maybe you don't belong in certain spaces.
Yeah, and I think in that regard, if you look at our current council makeup, the majority of us are not white male, right? And so I think this term, we have the power of numbers. That I know I'm not the only one, and that I know my colleagues will be behind me, should any kind of negative things happen. And we talk a lot about sort of not just like media training, but also security protocols and that kind of stuff for things that are really escalating. And I think I myself need to set some rules and boundaries in terms of what am I comfortable with. And I think it's okay to say no to certain things, and it's okay to, have. And I think sometimes it's okay not to engage on certain commentary or issues. So I think it's a combination of those things that um, that would, will, I guess we'll find out what will work. But I wouldn't say that now that you're elected, it's kind of smooth sailing. It's not. And I think we saw that in the first 2 months. There's a lot of hiccups. There's something constantly in the news, that people want answers, and they want to understand how I vote, specifically. And so as the role of the counselor is to make sure that, you know, the issues, your own values, and then why you're making the kind of decision that you're making, and then how that is being reflected, in the communities that you're representing.
This is a last fluff question, Karen. I'm just wondering, with the other female counselors, you guys meet for makeup sessions, nail painting sessions. Do you do night outs together with the girls, or how has it worked with bonding with the other female counselors?
Yeah, I think bonding, I think so far as a group, not only with the female counselors, I think as a group, we're getting along quite well. We often don't agree, and I think you see that in the votes that happen in public. There are a number of split vote at this point, but I feel like we can do that respectfully. And we have to think about city council as a team. It's very different from very partisan kind of politics that we see at the provincial and federal governments. We are a team. We have to work together, because if you don't work together, you're not going to get big agenda items move forward. You're not going to be able to see shovels on the ground on all kinds of, for example, infrastructure projects. And so I think about sort of our relationship as a whole. And I think, we do have various personalities, but I think that sometimes those one-on-one coffees and walks are really helpful. And no, we don't have nail painting parties and stuff. And I do think that is very much a stereotype of what do female counselors do. But we have
Sorry.
we have conversations to get to know each other as human beings, to understand, because many of us don't really know each other prior to the election, right? And so there's a lot of, like, I think, history and experiences and values that we might not always understand. And I think the more we understand about each other, the more we can understand about why this person is voting a certain way, and and where do I stand in relation to that, and how do we, through the differences and similarities, find common ground and move forward together.
Thank you. I'm kind of curious. Last night, 45,000 Edmontonians lost their power, ranging from 4 to 9 hours. Is there anything council can do to demand accountability from Epcor?
Yeah, so I think that is an interesting question. You know, in the first few months on council, we get oriented to a lot of things, including bodies like Epcor, and there's several other, I would say, corporations in which the city of Edmonton and city council are shareholders. They're not board of governors. They don't direct the work of these organizations. They're actually, in fact, not always accountable because there is a separate governance structure. Shareholders make sure that groups like Epcor are properly governed by a board. And when outages like that happen, and I think for like 9 hours, that's incredibly unusual. And in cases like that, internally, Epcor always does like an internal investigation. And when we don't hear about it in the public, I think city council have a role to kind of follow up on that and to say what exactly is going on. Epcor has a relationship with individual councillor's office, like a direct line, because oftentimes residents don't always call Epcor first. They might go to their councillor, and but to actually resolve a specific issue, it is the people who deliver that service. And so in terms of accountability, there is a board that governs, that is accountable to Epcor, and the city council's role is to make sure that those folks are actually doing their job in terms of guiding and directing the direction of that organization. And based on what I've seen and what I've heard, I think there's a number of good things that is happening, that is promising. But on things like that, I think the best thing that the city councillors can do is to follow up. If we are hearing from the community that we don't see it in the mainstream media, that we are not seeing any kind of follow up to say, we investigated this issue, and this is the problem, and this is how we resolved it, and this is how we'll ensure that this doesn't happen again. If we don't see that, absolutely, we should be following up and making sure someone is taking responsibility.
Okay, just that right there is very comforting. Someone right there is taking responsibility. Could you please talk to us about the Edmonton Police and the flip-flop that happened? There was a budget freeze, and then there was an increase. And there's just a lot of drama around Edmonton Police. And I'm just wondering if, in your own opinion, you think they'll ever win the public vote as a sensitivity and just basic kindness when they deal with vulnerable members of the society?
Yeah, and I think even in recent news, we've seen some, I think, really negative news headlines in terms of how police and the city has dealt with some of the vulnerable populations. I think the police budget item number one is the biggest item in the city's operation budget. It is probably the biggest issue on the plate. It took the longest time during the budget discussion for us to kind of come to some kind of resolution, and I don't think that's surprising. And I think when we talk about budget freeze, I think there might be some misperception of what that actually means. So budget freeze can mean you're freezing the amount of budget in its absolute term as is. But I think the other end of that is budget freeze is we're freezing the budget that is determined through the police funding formula. And the funding formula, which is on a 4-year cycle, says, every year this is the percent increase that the police gets. And that increase is all part of the budget freeze as perceived by the police. And so, I don't know if there's like a matter of flip-flopping on decisions, or it's just a difference in how people perceived what budget freeze meant. And so what was in question this year is actually that increase as determined by the funding formula, to say, should the police be actually receiving what has been already decided, the 0.7%, to them. And we've seen some like huge, I would say, differences of opinion on that matter. But I will say too, overwhelmingly, I think there is a appetite to say, we can't keep increasing like this because it's not sustainable. So do we not give them that increase this year, or is it next year? But at some point, we're going to stop doing that. And so the question is when. And ultimately, council decided is that this year we're not going to do that. And I think policing is also incredibly difficult and complex to navigate because as a city council, we don't actually oversee the police budget. It's the police commission, which is then governed by the provincial legislation of Police Act. And so there are limits to what city council can ask, can receive information, but we can't actually direct the police service to spend the money that we give them through property taxes. And I think that is the conundrum every single time in terms of who actually gets to make the decision, and who delivers on those decisions, and then what is the role of the city councillor. In my opinion, a lot more needs to be done when it comes to police reform, not just on the ground, but legislatively as well. And I think we've had some opportunities in the past when it comes to the big city charter, but we don't those opportunities were lost, and we're kind of stuck in this situation that is actually, I don't know if it's really good for anybody. But for me personally, on that vote, I think we're in a very unusual time right now where for the past couple of years with COVID, we've cut back on a lot of things. We've asked everyone to do more with less. And I think the police service was the exception to that. And we keep increasing, and I want to know to what end. And the funding that we had diverted, many people would say that you didn't really have a plan for that, and I would disagree. In fact, several weeks prior to the budget hearing, I have put forward a motion about, can we have a robust methodology to make sure that we allocate those funding, the community well-being and safety funding, so that we can demonstrate this is how we're alleviating the pressure on the policing. And so that is coming, and that is the plan of how are we going to be allocating the funding diverted from the police. But people keep asking, why are you defunding the police? We didn't defund. Police has $384 million for 2022. That's $1 million more than 2021 to work with, and we approved the $1 additional million to help offset some of the costs related to the Truth and Reconciliation Day.
So what is the appetite for police reform? Is there any appetite on council at all?
I mean, absolutely. And I think, we have a chief who is actually quite known for his innovation and, innovative mindset and doing things differently. And that is certainly the reputation I've known him for, and I think that is the hope. I think the other thing we have to remember is that in terms of the levers for change when it comes to city council, we have two. One is the funding, and two is who we appoint on the police commission to oversee that budget. And this year we have appointed two people to commission already. Three commissioners stepped down, and so we appointed two with one pending. And sort of given the current makeup of the police commission, I think given the leadership of our police chief, given some of the work that has been happening in the past few years in terms of culture shift and culture change, and given the current makeup of the council, I think there's absolutely appetite for reform. And I hope we go beyond just kind of reform at sort of the practical level. I hope we think more about kind of the values of policing, values of law enforcement, values around relationship that law enforcement might have with communities, and really to start prioritize maybe some of the things that haven't been prioritized in the past.
We don't have too long more to go, but I've got to put in this question. We have just gone through a deep freeze. And what I hear is that the roads were very slippery. Does the city actually have the money or the budget to keep everybody safe all the time when there's freezing rain, when there's snow, or when the temperatures are like deep freezy like Arctic like temperatures. Their money to keep us all safe because cold is synonymous to being in Edmonton, and yet we still complain every time there's a big dump.
Yeah. I think the short answer is no, there's not enough funding for that. And I think this year we're
Right.
seeing some of the things that maybe we haven't quite experienced as much. Yes, we'll always be a winter city. That's no, there's no doubt for that. But I think last year we saw less complaint because we got less snow. We didn't have this kind of ice that we saw this year. We didn't see the same kind of temperature fluctuation as extreme as we saw this year. That you have the freeze thaw cycles, um, and a few years ago when the decision around the use to or whether or not we should use calcium chloride, which in my opinion, I think would have increased some of the road safety. But ultimately the council at the time voted that down because of some of the pushback from the public in terms of what that might do to to the cars. But we actually still use calcium chloride on some of the public sidewalks and stuff because I think ultimately that does increase safety. So I think we had to keep in mind some of these historical votes and decisions that did happen. And right now, we have a pilot project going on with the snow and ice removal team for them to blade residential streets down to down to the bare concrete. I think in the past it was that was not the case, and the service level in residential streets is often like an ice rink. We saw that this year.
Right.
So it's a pilot project, so it's not citywide. It's in some neighborhoods, and the goal there is to see what is the impact, and in particular, what is the budget impact? How much would that cost? And believe me when I say that there will be a budget conversation about this. Because if it's positive, of course we want it citywide, but that comes at a cost. And this will be part of the discussion for the 4-year cycle this fall. And the final thing I'll just say is one of the things that I think a lot about is how do people who can't get out of their home and shovel their snow on their sidewalk, because the sidewalk in front of your home is actually the homeowner's responsibility. But what about those people who can't get out there? And because of that, they're kind of trapped in their homes. And I did ask, this question to administration around, what would it take for us to actually just take care of all sidewalks, as many cities do? And that question has come up before with other councillors. I believe Councillor Paquette has asked the same question. And the response is that then the budget we need is about 4 times as much. And it's hard to compare city to city because in many cities, they use different kinds of equipment. They use different kinds of materials like salt that we don't. And we have to take a very much an Edmonton solution to this.
Yeah, that was the next question I was going to ask. But I've always wondered with the salt situation, is this present council able to overturn the decision of the previous council? Or must the decision of the previous council be binding on this council?
Well, I mean, I think so far some of the decisions has already happened. For example, this decision about whether or not the city should be selling its stock of greenfield to private development, or should the city be developing its own. That decision hasn't officially been reversed, but it is on pause right now. I think as new councils, there are new views and new perspectives and different kinds of values that I think there are opportunities to revisit. But that also, it's not when we say let's reverse the decision. It's also just it doesn't just happen like that. It takes public engagement that which also takes resource to revisit things. So when that does need to happen, we have to be very, very thoughtful about it.
Mm. Thank you very much, Karen. I will make this my final question.
Sure.
As a councillor, what do you what sort of problems do you interact with regularly? Is it the opioid crisis? Is it the houselessness problems, or is it just crime? As Police Chief Dale McFay said, that the city does have a problem with crime, and then we've had problems on Edmonton Transit with crime lately as well. That's been in the news. And I'm also curious about your goals for 2022. Is it realistic to have a 10-point legislative goal? I'm gonna achieve all this. Is this the way you work as a counselor?
Yeah. So on that, what's the issue that I interact the most with? Do you mean specifically within the realm of policing and safety, or is it just generally?
No, just generally, I'm just kind of curious what kind of social problems hijack your day every day, and then you think, oh wow, this is Edmonton. It is a concern. Just,
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes in waves. You know, when we are debating the mask mandate, I would say COVID is probably highly on
wow.
people's mind that we hear a lot about when it comes to phone calls and emails. Right now, as you pointed out, I would say snow removal is number one. It is actually off the chart how much response that we have. And for a while there, we've also gotten quite a bit of public response about the opioid overdose and kind of depending on what is on the agenda, police funding, of course, is also quite high. Um, and we also have to think about some of these issues that they're not solely city responsibility. When you talk about opioid overdose, so that is very much a provincial jurisdiction, and the city's role, is really to work with those service providers, many of which are funded through the province, and to play that advocacy role too, to say. Um, we need greater support and resource in this area so that the city, we can play a more of a preventative and health promotion role, and then that will in turn lead to healthier, happier lives and communities. But we have to really keep in mind of the interplay. I think opioid for sure is top of mind for people. At the city level, we've done some awareness campaigns. That was for example, there was one not too long ago at the library, and worked with our partners to provide, training for naloxone and stuff like that. But it's a constant, politically and policy wise, is constantly interacting with other levels of government and making sure communities have the resources to address some of those issues.
Mm. Um, Karen, do you have a legislative agenda for
Do I
2022?
do I have a legislative agenda? I have a platform that I ran on, for the election, and I would say that's my agenda for my 4 years. My goal certainly every year is to visit and see how much we can accomplish through that. Even in the first couple months, so there was a few things on the platform that I was happy that I was able to kind of contribute and move forward, including banning of hate symbols in public places. That motion was passed. But I think for 2022, there will be some pretty big budget discussions coming up this year. We're looking at our next 4-year cycle, so it gives council the opportunity to not only visit the small everyday decisions, but also thinking about some transformative decisions that could really impact the city for years to come. So I think that's certainly on the table. There are a few of my motions, and I have a few more certainly in mind. I wouldn't say I have a 10-point, but it really, to me, it's a constant reminder of what it is why am I here in this role? If people voted me on this platform, I want to make sure it happens. And so, what are some of those near, medium, and long term um, uh, opportunities that I can explore to move those pieces forward? I think right now, quite high on my list too, is to make sure that we are building the we're building the capacity and the ecosystem for research and innovation, in the southeast, in particular within the Edmonton Research Park, that is in the ward that contributes significantly to our economic activity in the city. That I want to see it more prioritized as that engine. Um, I think there are like a number of things that I think that are important to me when it comes to moving forward on our truth and reconciliation commitments. we have a few pieces coming forward this year on that as well. I think community well-being and safety will always be top of mind. And how can we build neighborhood capacity and continue to find ways and solutions and partnerships to help offset the pressure on policing. And that will be a conversation I will continue to explore. So yes, in a way, there are 10-point bullets, and I will refer you to my platform on kerentang.ca.
Keren, I want you to let us go with something hopeful. What gives you hope? You must be a woman of courage and hope. And I want you to give us a little bit of that hope and sunshine that we can carry onwards into 2022.
Why don't I do this? Why don't I read you a message from a group of students that I spoke with not too long ago, from a school in Summerside, which is in the ward. And so we have a city school that does a tremendous job of engaging young people and students in civic engagement and talking about how does city hall work, city council, what do mayors and city councilors do exactly. And I just spent a bit of time talking about my experience, and they wrote me a letter, and it was inspiring for me, and it gave me so much hope. So they said, thank you for taking half an hour out of your busy day to teach us about your plans for being a counselor and telling us what you do. I know everybody loved your presentation, and many of us are inspired to get into politics as soon as possible. I know when we turn 13, we can take part in the youth council, so I bet some kids will join that. We hope to meet you in person in January when we are at City Hall School. So I think that always gives me hope, is to inspire young people to be interested in politics, right? And to know that there are structures like the youth council where they can have a voice too. And that letter came in pretty timely and give me a lift in spirit when I saw that, and also grounds me in thinking about like, who am I here for? Why am I here? And I think it's about the youth, the future. Some of them are not even born yet, about those future residents and the people who are going to be shaping our city continuously.
Keren, I want to say thank you so very much. And I kind of love the relationship you and I have, and I promise I won't break that. I like that I can send you a text, and most importantly, you reply. So I'm deeply grateful for seeing LCC Media and all the work that we do. So I am very, very grateful. I'm going to let you go now. I'm going to end the broadcast, but I ask you to stay for just 30 more seconds. It's something I don't want the world to hear that I'm telling you.
Okay.
So next time we have Sharon Van Norman. She's the CEO of Glow Edmonton. So it's going to be all about Festival of Light and Bright Lights. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you again, Keren, for joining our show today.
Thank you.